What is up, everybody? It is me, your boy TPT, coming at you, not live and not from Twitch TV. Now, once again, before the video starts, just gonna give a shout out to the E4 Casuals Discord. Great place to hang out and learn the game, particularly if you're new. They host games pretty much every single day, and as long as you avoid the politics channel, you'll end up having a great time there. So now, let's get into the video, and today's video topic will be quite a highly requested one, actually, that being estates. So we've got quite a few things to cover, and I think we just jump into it. So with estates, there are some important things you need to know. The most important concept, I would argue, would be crown land. So with the new estate mechanics, you know how you used to go down to your estates, you know, in the little tab here, and you used to assign the provinces to the estates. Well, as of the most recent patch, that is no longer the case, and instead the states just are counted as giving a proportionate amount of land in your country, although these aren't given to specific provinces. So instead, it's represented by these icons up here, as well as the land controlled by you, which is your crown land. Now, crown land is really important, as at high tiers it can give a lot of bonuses, and at low tiers it can be quite literally game ending. So I will just put up a quick graph on the screen here, if I remember. Hopefully I remember. But needless to say, basically this just shows the different bonuses that you get from crown land. You've got your absolutism on the left, then you've got the monthly autonomy reduction, the tax, and the subject liberty desire from development, and lastly the yearly absolutism. Now, I would say the three most important things out of this is the yearly absolutism, the max absolutism, and honestly the autonomy reduction, particularly because like I said, when you get to low crown land and you've got that autonomy like right up, it basically can cripple your economy, and particularly if you're not careful. Like if we look, okay, so if we go to our autonomy here, you'll see that we lose 0.125 each month due to the following. We've got our government rank and we're at peace. So we look at that and we think, okay, that's interesting. So we get 0.1 for peace, all right? But, okay, if we were to get below 20% crown land and we were to declare war on someone, our autonomy would actually passively tick up. You do not want your autonomy passively ticking up at any point in the game. And it would be on every one of your provinces. Not just one province, it would be on every single province. You know, and if you get below 10% crown land, even in peace, your autonomy would tick up. And once that starts to happen, it becomes very difficult to revert the situation. So you really need to stay permanently above 20% crown land. My recommendation would actually be around 25%, because the fact that you can get events which give extra land to the estates, up to 5%. However, if you do just drop to 20, you know, it's not the end of the world. You can always, you know, it's relatively recoverable. It's just that you will be suffering some pretty crappy modifiers for, you know, a number of years. Again, particularly the autonomy. Early game, the absolutism doesn't matter, but the autonomy matters a lot throughout the entirety of the game. Now, one extra little thing about crown land, all right, before we do jump into specifics, all right, always click this button at the start of the game. Every time. Click it every time at the start of the game, because your estates will always start at 50 loyalty, and that means that when you click that button, you will instantly get the +5 crown land with no negative benefits. However, if you look, our estate equilibrium, which again we'll cover in a second, but that's actually below 50, so if we were to wait even a single month, if we click that button, we would then get rebels rising up. So you want to click it at like very straight away, start of every campaign, before you even tick over your first month. Now, you may be asking, okay, how do we get crown land? Well, you may have noticed just the one way that I showed you, which is to seize land off of your estates. Now, this costs 20 loyalty, and you can do it once every 5 years. Now, I would suggest trying to do this as often as possible, as it's one of the most reliable ways of getting Crown Land early. And you really need Crown Land early, because you want to be grabbing these primacy bonus privileges here. Which, again, we'll cover privileges in a second, but needless to say, you want to be grabbing as much Crown Land as possible, and you do not want to be selling it. Never click this button in the early game. I'll get into a bit later about when you can click it, but never click it in the early game ever. The money is just not worth the negative benefits that it poses to your country, and it also isn't as good as the other things you can get from spending that Crown Land, like, again, for example, monarch points and governing capacity. You know, that is essentially a monarch point a month that you're just giving away there for only 300 ducats. It's not really worth it. In the late game, it can be, but early game, not really. So, the other ways you go Crown Land, if you actually hover over here, you can see the ways that you can grab Crown Land. So, the first of all is seizing land from the estates, which I just showed you there. Gives you 5% Crown Land, and it costs, like I said, the 20 loyalty. Now, the next one is develop provinces. So every time you develop a province, you gain 0.2% Crown Land. So if we look here, doesn't matter which one we click, it's 0.2% Crown Land, which you can see on the bottom of it there. Now, it's the same through every province. I don't think I've seen any events which actually change this. It is just a flat 0.2% every single time. Now, the other two things are conquering land with less than 60% estate influence. So if you have low influence on your estates, you can get extra Crown Land from conquering it. And that's also, you know, it's a pretty nice way of picking up. And the last one, which is really important in the late game, is conquer land with high absolutism. So if you have a large amount of absolutism saved up and you conquer land, it will actually also increase your absolutism. Sorry, it will increase your Crown Land based on both your absolutism and also how much land you took. So when in those cases, when you reach to around 95% Crown Land, just before you take a bit of land, it's not necessarily a bad idea to do the sale of titles, because otherwise you may be wasting a percentage of that Crown Land. And if you look, whilst the benefits of 100% Crown Land are pretty nice, realistically the autonomy is really nice, but it's only 5% tax, and the autonomy is not the end of the world anyway, as by that late point in the game you've probably already got a lot of passive autonomy reductions anyway from, you know, empire status, and from things like economic ideas, because economic ideas are very good. Pretty much every single game you should be taking them, and if we look, they do have the monthly autonomy change right there. I will be doing a video on ideas later on, but not going to be covering it right now. We're just going to be focusing again on estates. So we've seen how to get Crown Land, but how do we get things like loyalty in that? Well, there's a couple ways to do it once again. The first one, which I would always recommend trying to do, is the Summon the Diet. So all of your estates gain 5% influence and they gain 5 loyalty as well. Now, when you do that, you'll see this pop up right here. It's the agenda of the Diet, and it gives you 3 options to click. And if you look, every time, you know, each one of these you pick, you can gain a bunch of positives, or if you fail it, a bunch of negatives. So agendas last for 20 years, so you have to complete the task in 20 years. So as you can see, there's a few options here. We can go Papal States opinion of France is at least 100, Nassau's opinion of France is at least 100, and the alternatively have at least 513.5 ducats in our treasury. Realistically, all these are pretty decent. Sometimes you can get some really, really nice modifiers from this. I believe you can actually get stability very occasionally, as well as half-price advisors. And I can tell you, if you see a half-price advisor on a agenda that you can do, I would 100% recommend taking that one if you don't have one already, because half-price advisors are one of the best and most cost-efficient ways of getting increased monarch points, and getting your increased monarch points is pretty much how you win the game. Like, the more monarch points you have, the more likely you are to win the game, and I would say it's probably one of the single most influential factors of doing as such. Particularly when it comes to multiplayer, the meta is very heavily centered around gaining monarch points as quickly as possible. You know, with disinheriting heirs, having max advisors, etc., etc. So yeah, I would suggest taking the one that you can do relatively easily, or again, alternatively, gives you the most loyalty if you need it, or as a third option, it has a very nice, very nice perk to it. Because if you can't take another diet until you complete the current one that you've got. So if we look here, all right, we've got that, and it says can't be used again until 1449. But if it reaches 1449 and we still haven't completed this, then we won't be able to do another diet, which makes it harder to seize crown land if you don't have too many privileges. So, speaking of privileges, that will be related to how we increase our loyalty equilibrium. So you may be asking, what's loyalty equilibrium? Well, essentially, your estates have a base value of loyalty that they will trend to or drift to every single month. So I will say this is, let me just start off with, this is so much nicer than the old version because of the fact that it gives you a lot more leeway before you start to get some negative effects. So when you are dealing with your estates, you'll notice that we're currently getting some nice benefits from them. These are associated with two things. One is their loyalty, and two is their influence. The higher a state has with their influence, the more that these, the higher these numbers will be, both the positive and negative, as well as when you reach over 60% loyalty, you will also get a second bonus. So I would always, once again, I would always suggest taking something like this first, and getting those extra monarch points, because once again, they're extremely important and you should grab as many as you can. However, don't do it when you're below 30% crown land, because that will put you below 20% crown land after you've taken it. Each of them cost 10% crown land. And as we've stated, that will give some serious negative modifiers, which especially in the early game just are not worth it and can easily cripple a run from the get-go. It's basically like shooting yourself in the leg. So there are two, I would say the two most important privileges are the nobility land rights, primacy of the nobility, and you've got the clergy land rights and religious state, and then you've got the bourgeoisie land rights and the land of commerce. So the first one, it gives governing capacity, and the second one gives monarch points. Now, you have got to note that the monarch points one do actually decrease the loyalty. However, the land rights do increase the loyalty. So that is something to know. You'll also see that you have a bunch of other, you have a bunch of other unrelated, modifiers. Like, oh, what's this? Oversight of clergy, clerical ministers, and all of that. So, now, when it comes to what the loyalty of your states should be, what you should aim for, it can be a little bit of a contentious issue. However, I would suggest roughly keeping it between 45 to a 50% equilibrium. If it's a little bit higher than that, it's okay, but you want it to at least be 45%. Now, you may be asking, why 45%? Why not like 50%? Well, the reason is because 45%, if you use a diet with the 45%, that puts you up to 50%, which means that you can successfully seize land without having to, deal with the rebels that would often be associated with reducing the loyalty of said estates. Now, obviously, you can also do it at 50%. There are both positives and negatives to this. The negative is that you do have more privileges, and again, I'll be covering in a second as to why, but it does make it a bit harder to remove those privileges. And two is, however, the positives are that, if you get like a bad roll on a diet, because sometimes it can be very difficult to complete the diet missions, particularly if they don't fit in with your associated plans. You don't have to worry about it. It's not the end of the world, because you've still got the 50% equilibrium, and so you can still just seize land without having to worry too much about it. I do think it is definitely a personal preference. I tend to lean towards the 45%, but if I do have like one or two estates that are 50, because realistically, it's very difficult to get all of your estates at the exact same value. Some will normally be higher than the other. As you can see here, there are different factors that affect it, like religious unity, prestige. This one's got legitimacy on it, or mercantilism, naval tradition, all of that. So there are a lot of different modifiers around the equilibrium outside of the privileges. However, I would say the privileges are the most important one. Something else to note is that the higher your prestige is, the higher the loyalty equilibrium is as well. And sometimes if you have enough of those sort of bonuses, you can start off with the 45% equilibrium, and you can actually push that all the way up to a 50% just without giving extra privileges. So you've always got to consider all of your options when you're doing it. Now, a couple countries do get some unique privileges. That's why I picked France, because they have one called the French Strong Duchies, which gives them +3 diplomatic relations and -10% limited desire in same continent subjects, which is the reason that they're able to support so many of their little vassal states within France. There's not too many of them, however, there is one or two. I wouldn't worry too much about them. However, I would say some of the most important ones do occur over in India, of which we will just take a quick gander over to. Because India has the same general idea, except they actually can have up to 5 states here, particularly with the, what do you call them? The Indian sultanates. They tend to have quite a few. However, when you think about it, that also, each and every single one of these can also get governing capacity. So it's definitely something to watch out for. You know, is the fact that you can essentially get 500 governing capacity as compared to 300 that the Europeans can get, which makes it a lot easier to blob, particularly again in the early game. However, okay, this brings us to the next point, is if you read the privileges, you'll see that not everything about them is positive. Okay, you'll see this little sign over here, maximum absolutism will be changed. It is a little bit of a typo from Paradox. I really hope they fix it, because it does annoy my OCD something fierce, but will be changed by -10. Okay, and this is where it's very important. You need to take note of how close you are to the age of absolutism. You know, if we see here, we got it right there. And as you approach that age, you need to start revoking privileges. You want to have at least the 50%. So I would honestly say lean towards 75%, but you want to have at least 50% crown land by the time you get to age of absolutism. Again, I would recommend having around 75% or like 60 plus, because that also gives you a +1 yearly absolutism, and it lets you boost your absolutism either. For you newer players that don't know, absolutism is a extremely important mechanic, as it gives you discipline, it gives you core cost creation reduction, and no one really cares about the rest. So I would always recommend trying to get a high absolutism. You don't need to worry about microing it too much. Like, don't worry too much about, like, you know, decreasing autonomy in provinces, but always make sure that you don't have, you know, an infinite number of privileges. You don't want to give away all of the privileges, because that makes it really hard to take them off. And you do want to have the ability to take them off. I normally start doing it around 1550, 1560 or so. You know, about gives me about a 50 to 70 year window. 50 to 60 year window, because if you don't know, the age of absolutism starts specifically in 1610, because it happens 10 years after global trade, and global trade pretty much always spawns right on 1610. I think I've ever had it where it hasn't spawned right on 1610, though it is technically possible. But it's pretty much guaranteed 1610, and so you want to be removing privileges not at 1610, but you want to start removing them early, because that way you've got, you know, extra time to start snowballing. And that, you know, that is a big reason, is you want to have high absolutism, because it lets you expand and it lets you fight better, and those are both very important. Now, the next point here is regarding the influence. So influence basically is just a representation of how powerful these states are. As I mentioned, they do also affect the little passive bonuses you get off the estates. So if we just give it like a bunch of influence, you know, just keep on like pumping this up. Here we go. And then if we just let the month tick over, you'll see, not even a month, sorry, just one day. You'll see that it goes from -2.5% to -7.5%. So it can be quite a significant one. Obviously, the Rajputs honestly aren't the greatest example. However, you know, just pretend like this national tax modifier goes from 5% to 20%, or, you know, if we go back to France. you know, like we go from, 5% trade efficiency, how about 20% trade efficiency, you know? It can be a very significant part of your money. And if if you take away land from your state and you wonder, why am I losing money all of a sudden? It's probably the fact that you've gone into the negative, the negative loyalty with estates. Because if you go into negative loyalty with estates, you basically get these abilities in reverse. And also some bad ones as well. Like you can get negative unrest. You may go from, negative plus 20% trade efficiency to negative trade efficiency, which isn't just a 20% drop, it's a 40% drop. So you've got to consider those sort of factors. Now, another reason why you have to keep an eye on influence is there's two things. One, you can't remove, if we look here, you can't remove a privilege if your state's loyalty is lower than their influence. So if we hover over this, see, to revoke a privilege, the state's loyalty must be higher than their influence. And if we look, their influence is 55%, but their equilibrium is only 51%. And that's why you need to prepare ahead of time, because not only do you lose 20 loyalty when you take away the privilege, but you also need to have a higher loyalty than their influence in order to be able to remove it in the first place. See, I can just remove this straight away. All right. And look, we got negative 15% loyalty, so they're below the 30%, and so we get negative 5% tax, negative 0.5 yearly papal influence, negative plus 5% stability cost, and plus 1 national unrest. And as you can imagine, those numbers really start to add up. Plus, it can also make it very difficult to take away estate land without raising the rebels in your country. So you've got to be very careful around that. Now, another reason why you need to be careful about the influence of your states is, I think we can probably get it high enough just of this alone, but let's see. Okay, yeah, no, we won't be able to get high enough, but if your estates reach 100 influence, you have to be very careful with them, because if they, at any point they drop below 50 loyalty while they're at 100 influence, you can start to get a disaster. And as you can tell from the name, disasters are not good. In fact, they are very, 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 very bad. So you need to be very careful about that, because you do not want a disaster to occur, as again, they can really stifle your expansion and cripple your economy for a significant amount of time. Plus, it can also encourage other countries to declare war on you, because they do recognize those sort of things when they occur. So you always want to make sure that the influence is, I would say, below around 75%, because the highest events goes normally around 15%, but most of them will go 10. And so if you get like 2 bad events, boom, you're at 100% influence, and now your estates become a serious issue because you have to monitor them super carefully. And it's also really hard to take away land off them, because their influence is much higher than your loyalty equilibrium, and you've got to be careful about that. Now, just one small trick you can do occasionally is, if you're at the particular tier for it, should be here, isn't it? Yeah. So there is one little bit of cheese you can do. It's quite situational. However, if you find that you're struggling dealing with 3 estates, or your nobility in particular, you can take the tier 6 Parliamentarianism Reform, which gives you -1 national unrest. It disables the court of dear, which you have got to consider. That means that you will want your your estates to probably be at 50% base loyalty equilibrium, and it also disables the nobility estate. So instead of worrying about 3 estates, you've only got to worry about 2, and it's a pretty nice little cheese that you can use. But obviously, like I said, you do have to have a good amount of crown land, and you need to have their loyalty higher than their influence. So it is an option to consider, though, is a little bit of cheese there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've covered basically everything that I wanted to cover right now. Maybe I'll see if there's anything I missed. Honestly, if I do feel like there's anything I missed in this series, I'll probably just make like maybe 1 or 2 videos at the very end covering all of the little points that I didn't, cover in these videos. Maybe I missed like a small thing or two, and so, you know, I'll just like add them all together and put them in the last video. However, I do still have plenty planned. Not going to spoil what one is next. However, I really hope you guys have enjoyed. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to check out my Twitch. I stream there 8 PM Australian Eastern Standard Time every single day. Or join the Discord, which will be, the link will also be in the description down below. If you ever have any questions, if you need clarification about this, just feel free to ask away on Discord, YouTube comments, or Twitch. It doesn't even matter if I'm not streaming EU4, I would still happily answer your questions. Just don't hesitate to ask. So anyway guys, I hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you all next video. Peace.